James, the Sun newspaper has launched its campaign today, which essentially is saying, don't betray Brexit. Now, the Sun newspaper has seen documents that kind of prove that Keir Starmer, in his mania to reset our relationship with the EU, has gone to the table and is in the process of agreeing to demands from Ursula von der Leyen and the Brussels gang that kind of basically ruin Brexit. So in order to be allowed to the table to cap in hand say, oh, could we have a nicer trade deal, please? We are going to be required by the EU right off the bat to give up our fishing rights, our hard-earned fishing rights, to allow under 30-year-old Europeans, under 30s foreigners, to just come here, no questions asked, and live. So there go the borders. So anyone under 30 will be allowed to come here. And finally, we will have to agree to do exactly what we're told by the European Court of Justice. In effect, this Prime Minister of ours is basically selling Brexit straight down the river. I mean, this is not just a reset. This is the rejoining in all but name. He is betraying what the people of this country voted for, and he's doing it sneakily. He's already earmarked or set aside more than 100 civil servants to get round the table with our European brothers so that they may or may not give us a nicer trade deal while we, or rather Starmer's goons, trade off everything that Brexit was all about. I mean, socialists don't particularly like democracy, but what Starmer's doing is an utter affront to the British people's democratic decision to leave the EU, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And I say this as someone who voted for Remain, and I spent quite a long time, wanging on about the merits of Remain. I mean, for me, it was about somewhere in the middle. It should have been something like EEA-EFTA, a bit like Norway and Switzerland, which would have got the sort of the best things, in particular the protection of free trade. But that was lost in the debate, and that's a separate discussion. But moving on to what's happening here with Starmer, yes, it is a betrayal, because I believe in democracy, despite the fact the decision went against what I believed back then. And I think there's been a lot of things that have emerged since then that might change people's own views of the EU. There's aspects that I'm uncomfortable about the EU, many aspects. But what I'm really uncomfortable about, as someone who voted for Remain, is the one thing that's more important than our own individual political views. It's the protection of our democracy. It's okay for people on whatever side after a vote, if they lose, to carry on campaigning for it. That's part of democracy as well. But what's not okay is kind of the smoke and mirrors, by the back door of Brexit, which kind of a bit like Hotel California, you can check out, but you're never going to quite leave. That is unacceptable. And if you look at the fishing example, one of the things that's been in the news a lot of late, maybe for about a year, but in this country, particularly since inheritance tax, is the farming debate, and understandably. But I suspect one of the next big debates, and they must never be forgotten about, sometimes they're occasionally overlooked compared to farmers, but they're effectively the farmers of our waters, is the fishing communities, which is another massive aspect with our food security. And if Starmer goes down this route and signs this new deal and effectively throws our fishing communities under the bus, then I suspect we'll end up having campaigns, coordinated campaigns on fishing, effectively, no fishing, no food, like no farmers, no food, whereby those communities, rightly so, will take some action. I think that is what's coming next. And what's happening with Starmer is quite interesting because, all these different communities, whether it's students or pensioners, or what's happened with women born in the 1950s today, or farmers, potentially the fishing communities, one by one, these communities have had enough, and rightly so. He's literally putting a line for them. And so I think the key part of this, there's two key parts actually. Firstly, an affront to democracy, which I've got no time for. And secondly, the fishing communities who will watch on with this, but effectively, what they were told back in Brexit versus now is up for grabs. So I think that is the aspect within what Starmer might do that will be the key issue.
And in terms of our borders, you know, the point of Brexit was to re-establish or rebuild our sovereign borders. We decide who comes into this country and who doesn't. That is the basic sacred principle of Brexit. And under this kind of arrangement, or the deal that it looks like we will sign, we'll have no say on who comes into this country as long as they're under 30. That could be millions of people. So we'll lose our sovereign borders. In effect, what Starmer is doing, because he's obsessed with Europe, he's a Remainer obsessive, we potentially could have a deal, a trade deal, because Donald Trump, despite everything, despite the fact virtually the entire Labour cabinet have called him juvenile names, particularly the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, but most of the cabinet have called him names at one time or other. Despite all of that, Donald Trump has an affection for this country. You know, his mother was from Scotland. He likes Britain. We potentially could have a great trade deal with booming, reinvigorating Trump's America. But of course, Starmer being Starmer, instead of that, he rejects that and he turns to sclerotic, clapped-out old Europe for a deal that will humiliate us, frankly. Trevor Kavanagh, the brilliant columnist in The Sun, wrote today that we will go with our begging bowl to Europe like a dog returning to eat its own vomit. Which sums it up. And, you know, this guy, Starmer, and his all-Remainer cabinet, every single member of his cabinet are passionate Remainers. They all voted Remainer. So his all-Remainer cabinet are taking us back into Europe. And it's going to be even worse than that, because they won't be quite... I mean, they're pretty stupid, but they're not stupid enough to say, right, we've rejoined. What they're going to do is rejoin in all but name. And in fact, it'll be much worse than being a member state, because all we can do is hang on to the coattails and do what we're told. And if we don't do what we're told, they will take away our trade deal. I mean, it's horrific. It's horrific.
It'll be sort of being stuck between a rock and a hard place, a sort of Brexit purgatory. It's neither in or out. Now, the issue with Brexit, in some ways, it wasn't about Brexit itself. That was the thing that got sort of inflated. The concern, ultimately, I think actually on both sides of the debate, was about whether governments could actually understand and then implement Brexit. And instead, what's happened is that governments haven't gone along with this. And again, as I say this as a Remainer, they haven't gone along with this. We're going to make this work. And we're going to make this work ultimately through trade, because it's always about that in these sort of things. But instead, what Starmer is pivoting back. And yes, I think it would be humiliating. And there's a lot of figures that are bandied around about Brexit. I mean, not, you know, there's aspects of it that haven't worked out. There's aspects that people don't know yet, still too early. There's aspects that have been okay. But everything on that side of the debate is framed around, oh, it must be the problem of Brexit. I mean, the cost of living crisis is a perfect example. You know, the cost of living crisis has happened right around the world. But in the UK, it's just down to Brexit. Actually, what's happened around the world is because of the massive disruption of so many supply chains since 2020 because of COVID. You know, if you shut down the economy for 18 months, then there's going to be repercussions of that. But, oh, no, it's always the fault of Brexit. And somewhere in the middle lies the truth. But one thing that really does hold true is that governments should basically secure and respect democracy.
Yeah.
Whatever side of the debate you think of on that, people voted for Brexit, and that should actually be respected. And Starmer, yeah, he's doing it by the back door. We don't know the details yet, but I suspect you're right, Kevin. I think we'll end up in a humiliating situation where we're kind of in, but they'll say that we're not. But effectively, we'll have the worst of all worlds, because we'll be tied up in loads of restrictions, probably some more restrictions than we had in the first place when we were in the EU.
Yeah, and remember when I said about, you know, that we would have to give up our fishing rights, allow under 30-year-old Europeans to just come into this country as and when they wish, and also to do exactly what we're told, to meekly obey the rules and diktats of the European Court of Justice. he's already sort of essentially negotiated those away, because von der Leyen and the Brussels gang, those boot boys from Brussels, have just said, unless you agree to all of this, you can't even come to the negotiating table. So we've already said yes to this. Now we're going to send 100 civil servants, more than 107, which David Frost, who negotiated our Brexit deal, has quite rightly christened the surrender squad. There are more civil servants working on this reset, this surrender, than actually worked on Brexit itself. He says that they are going to surrender everything that Brexit stands for, and this is a disgrace. And you know, you wonder, where does he get this idea that this is what the people of Britain want? Apart from his mates in Islington and Hampstead and on the North London sort of elite metropolitan dinner party circuit, you know, those kind of rich people who can afford to be socialists, apart from them, who the hell is it that wants this government to negotiate Brexit away? Who is it? Who is it?
Well, sir, it's certainly not the fishing. Certainly not the fishing communities.
I know.
I mean, but it's also the north of England. You know, the Red Wall. One of the reasons Labour in this sort of strange place, which has been sort of morphing towards us since Tony Blair, is that Labour aren't Labour anymore. You know, the Labour Party has now become an oxymoron. So the heartlands that Labour cared about, those heartlands in the north of England, walked away from the EU. And, you know, those communities voted by and large for Brexit because they felt forgotten about. It was, a lot of it was actually a protest vote, and I understand that. But what's happening now is you've got Labour. It's a very different dynamic. It's largely a city-based party, and I agree with it. It's kind of sneering metropolitan liberal elites who have their sort of highfalutin dinner parties and look down at all of us plebs and go that we are a bit thick, a bit stupid, and we should know our place. Well, actually, most people in this country do know what is going on with our politics.
Yeah, they do.
And that is, they're not getting a Labour Party that used to represent those communities. And I think this government, you know, Brexit's another example of this, and what Starmer's, there's so many other examples with Starmer. I predict this now, whether it's local elections, if they ever happen, you know, the devolved elections and ultimately the general election, this government is one term. They're going to be absolutely wiped out.
Yeah, and that's, of course, the local elections, depending on how many of them we get, because the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, is trying to delay as many of them as possible, because they're in May, by the way, and they will spell guaranteed humiliation for this Labour government. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to delay them, postpone them, put them off, saying, oh, we're going to redraw the boundaries of lots of constituencies. We need new mayors here, there. I think the best thing is just to delay some of these elections. So in order to avoid humiliation at the polls in the local elections at May, Starmer, that enemy of democracy, and that other enemy of democracy, Angela Rayner, their plan is, let's just not have those elections. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. Let me ask everyone what you think. If you voted Brexit, this guy Starmer is selling you down the river. He is going to get us to basically rejoin. We'll have to do what we're told by Europe in order for some measly trade deal. We're going to have to let under-30s into our country, no questions asked. We're going to have to obey the European Court of Justice. We're going to have to give away the fishing rights that we negotiated so toughly. All that, he's going to give all that away. There goes Brexit. What do you think about that?